After decades of lies he could no longer carry, Walter Hollis finally divorced the woman he had loved for 41 years and returned to his father's old house in the Kentucky countryside. And the moment he turned onto that gravel road, everything changed in a way no one in Pearson's Hollow had ever seen coming. For 41 years, Walter had been the quiet kind of husband small towns used to make, a retired shop teacher with calloused hands and a patient heart, a man who fixed every broken thing his wife Cordelia placed in front of him and never once asked what she was doing with the pieces of his late father Silas's estate that kept quietly disappearing from their Cleveland home. He had buried his mother at 19, buried his father at 45, and buried his own dreams somewhere between the two. But he had never once raised his voice, never once questioned the woman sleeping beside him, never once driven the 400 miles south to the bluegrass farmhouse his grandfather built in 1934, because Cordelia always had a reason they couldn't go. Then on a gray Tuesday in March, a stranger outside Henderson's Hardware called Walter by his father's name and said 7 words that cracked 4 decades of small lies wide open. And 6 weeks later, Walter Hollis signed the divorce papers, packed his father's toolbox into his old pickup, and pointed the truck toward a countryside house he expected to find collapsed into the weeds. But what was waiting for him on that swept porch in Pearson's Hollow? The woman standing in the doorway with a key in her hand, the orchard blooming pink and white after 22 years of supposed abandonment, the promise his dying father had made to someone Walter hadn't seen since 1974, would prove that the lies he had been told were only half the story, and that the man he thought he was had been quietly waiting for him at the end of that gravel road all along. Who had been keeping Walter's countryside house alive for 22 years while he sat trapped inside decades of lies 400 miles away? What had his father Silas hidden in that Kentucky farmhouse before he died? And why did he make a stranger promise never to tell Walter until the day he came home? And when Walter Hollis finally turned that rusted key in the door of the house he had divorced his old life to return to, what did he find waiting on the kitchen table that made a 67-year-old man fall to his knees and weep for everything the decades of lies had stolen from him? The gray Tuesday in March had started like every other Tuesday of Walter Hollis's retired life. He woke at 6, made coffee in a kitchen that did not feel like his, and stood at the window watching the wet street the way a man watches a clock he no longer trusts. Cordelia was still asleep upstairs. She always was. 41 years of marriage had taught Walter to move quietly through his own house, to set the cup down softly on the counter, to open the back door without letting the hinge speak. And he pulled on his old denim jacket, the one his father Silas had given him the summer he turned 22. And he drove the 6 blocks to Henderson's Hardware because the kitchen faucet had started dripping in the night, and Walter Hollis had never in his life let a thing stay broken when his hands could fix it. He did not know, walking across that wet parking lot, that he was walking toward the end of his old life. The stranger was leaning against a green pickup truck, an older man with white hair under a feed cap, and the kind of weathered face that belonged to people who had spent their lives outside. He looked up as Walter passed, and his eyes did something strange. They sharpened. They softened. They filled with a recognition that did not belong to a stranger at all. "Lord have mercy," the old man said. "You're Silas Hollis's boy. Aren't you?" Walter stopped walking. Nobody in Cleveland had spoken his father's name out loud in 22 years. He turned slowly. "I am," he said. "I'm Walter." The stranger smiled, but the smile was sad. He stuck out a calloused hand. "Elwood Carver, from down in Lee County, Kentucky. I knew your daddy back in the old days. I just come up to visit my boy here in Cleveland." He paused, and his eyes moved over Walter's face the way a man reads a letter he does not quite want to finish. "I always wondered about you, son. I bought your daddy's lathe off your wife back in '08. $400 cash. I've got it in my barn to this day. I always wondered why a man like Silas's only boy would let that lathe go. I know what that lathe meant to your daddy." The wet parking lot went very quiet around Walter Hollis. He felt the cold air enter his lungs and stay there. He felt the loose change in his pocket against his fingertips. He felt something move behind his ribs that he had not felt in 41 years. A small, slow turning, like a key finding the inside of a lock that had been waiting a very long time to be opened. I'm sorry, Walter said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. Could you say that again? Elwood Carver said it again. He pulled his old leather wallet from his back pocket with hands that shook a little, and he slid out a yellowed business card with handwriting on the back, and he held it out to Walter under the gray March sky. The handwriting was Cordelia's. Walter would have known it anywhere. He had been reading her grocery lists and her Christmas cards and her notes on the refrigerator for 41 years. A lathe. $400. Asses, no returns. C. Hollis, 2008. Walter looked at the card for a long time. He did not say anything. Elwood Carver, who had no idea what he had just done, kept talking about the lathe and about Silas and about the old days in Lee County. Walter heard none of it. Walter was somewhere else now. Walter was standing at his father's funeral in Pearson's Hollow in the spring of 2003, 22 years ago, listening to his father's lawyer read the will out loud in a small room above the bank in Beattyville. To my only son Walter, I leave the farmhouse, the orchard, the barn, the workshop, and every tool inside it. May he keep them, and may they keep him. Walter had not kept them. Walter had let them be kept from him. He thanked Elwood Carver in a voice that did not sound like his own. He walked back to his truck without buying the washer for the kitchen faucet. He sat behind the wheel in the parking lot of Henderson's Hardware for a long, long time, and he did not start the engine, and he did not cry, and he did not move. He just sat there and watched the rain begin to fall on the windshield, and he understood with a clarity that felt almost holy that he had been lied to, in small ways and in large ways, for longer than his own children had been alive. And somewhere 400 miles south of him, in a small bluegrass valley called Pearson's Hollow, an orchard his grandfather had planted in 1934 was getting ready to bloom for the 22nd spring without him. Walter Hollis drove home from Henderson's Hardware that gray Tuesday morning, but he did not go inside the brick house right away. He sat in the driveway with the engine running and the wipers moving slow across the glass, and he looked at the front door of the house he had paid for with 38 years of teaching teenagers how to read a level and plane a board straight, and he understood that he did not want to walk through it. Not yet. Not until he knew. He cut the engine. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, even though there were no tears on it. And before we go any further into what Walter Hollis found behind that front door, if your heart is already aching for this good, quiet man, do something kind for him right now. Tap that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the next part of Walter's story is the part nobody in Pearson's Hollow ever thought they'd live to see, and you do not want to miss a single minute of what's coming. He went in through the back. Cordelia was in the kitchen now, in her blue robe, pouring her second cup of coffee from the pot he had made at 6. She did not look up when he came in. She had not looked up when he came into a room in a long time. "Did you get the washer?" she said. "They were out," Walter said. He climbed the stairs to their bedroom on legs that felt like they belonged to a younger man. He went straight to the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The chest she had told him for 41 years held her mother's quilts. The chest he had never once opened because she had asked him not to. The chest he had walked past every single morning of his married life. He knelt down on the carpet in front of it. He put both hands on the lid. And for the first time since the day they were married in the summer of 1976, Walter Hollis opened something his wife had told him not to open. There were no quilts inside. There was a manila envelope, old and soft at the corners, the kind of envelope that holds the kind of paper a person does not throw away. Walter lifted it out with hands that had suddenly gone very still. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He opened the envelope, and the small, slow turning that had started in his chest in the parking lot of Henderson's Hardware became something larger now, something that felt like a door opening in a wall he had not known was there. Receipts. 30 years of receipts. His father's lathe. Sold to Elwood Carver in 2008 for $400. His grandfather's pocket watch, sold to a pawn shop in Akron in 2011 for $220. A set of hand planes, the planes Silas Hollis had used to build the kitchen table Walter had eaten breakfast at every morning of his childhood, sold at an estate auction in 2006. A walnut chest of drawers his father had built for his mother in 1962, sold to an antique dealer in Columbus in 2009, and then, near the bottom, a folded deed. Walter's hands were shaking now. He opened the deed slowly. It was for a 40-acre parcel of timberland adjoining the Hollis Farm in Pearson's Hollow, Kentucky, land his grandfather had bought in 1947 and his father had left to him in the will. The deed was dated March of 2003, 1 month after his father's funeral. And the signature at the bottom said Walter Silas Hollis in handwriting that was not his. Walter stared at that signature for a long time. He had taught penmanship to 7th graders for 9 years before they moved him to shop class. He knew his own hand. He knew it the way a man knows the sound of his own voice. And the name at the bottom of that deed was not written by him. Underneath the deed there was one more piece of paper, folded smaller than the rest, and yellowed at the edges. It was a canceled check. $2,000. Made out to a divorce attorney in downtown Cleveland. Dated November of 1994. Cordelia's signature on the bottom, neat and careful. She had paid a lawyer to leave him 31 years ago, and she had never followed through. And she had never told him. And then she had stayed in his house and slept in his bed and spent his father's inheritance one quiet piece at a time for 3 more decades. Walter did not cry. That was the part that surprised him later, when he thought back on it. He folded every receipt back into the envelope in the order he had taken them out. He put the envelope back in the cedar chest. He closed the lid softly. He went downstairs and asked Cordelia what she wanted for dinner, and she said meatloaf. And he said all right. And he drove to the grocery store and bought the ground beef and the onions and the breadcrumbs. And he made her the meatloaf the way she liked it. And he sat across the table from her that evening and watched her eat it. He had been patient for 41 years. He could be patient for 6 more weeks. And the next morning he called his old friend Hollis Beauregard, a quiet country lawyer from his teaching days who kept a small office downtown above a barber shop. Hollis listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Walter finished, Hollis said, "Walter, I have been waiting 30 years for you to call me about that woman. You come on down here this afternoon, and we will do this right." Walter hung up the phone and called his daughter Ruth in Cincinnati. Ruth was 34 years old now, a nurse at a children's hospital, the gentlest of his 2 children and the one who had always seen more than she said. He told her on the phone what he had found. He told her plainly, the way his father Silas would have told him. Ruth was quiet on the other end of the line for almost a full minute. And then, in a voice that broke a little in the middle, she said, "Daddy, I think I've been waiting my whole life to hear you say something like this. You come stay with me whenever you need to. You come right now if you have to." Walter said he would come soon. Then he called his son Nathaniel in Chicago. Nathaniel was 38, a corporate lawyer in a glass building, a man who had grown up hearing his mother's quiet version of who his father was and had believed it because children believe their mothers. The conversation was short. Nathaniel said he needed time to think. Nathaniel said he was not sure what to believe. Walter said, "Son, I love you, and I will not push you. You come around in your own time." And he hung up the phone, and he sat at his kitchen table, and he let himself feel the weight of a son who did not yet know him. 6 weeks. That was how long it took Hollis Beauregard to do the work properly. 6 weeks of quiet meetings in the office above the barbershop. 6 weeks of photographs and copies and notarized statements. 6 weeks of Walter coming home every evening and eating meatloaf or pot roast or chicken and dumplings across the table from a woman who had no idea that the man she had been managing for 41 years was very quietly becoming someone she could no longer manage at all. The papers were served on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. Walter was not in the house when it happened. He had asked Hollis to time it that way. He was sitting in a diner 3 miles across town, eating 2 eggs over easy and a slice of wheat toast, because he did not want to be there for Cordelia's face, and he did not want to hear what she would say. And he had given her 41 years of his presence, and he did not owe her this one. When he finished his eggs, he paid the check, and he drove to his daughter Ruth's apartment in Cincinnati, and he slept on her couch under a blanket she had crocheted for him the previous Christmas. He slept for 10 hours. He had not slept 10 hours in a row since he was a boy. And on the 4th morning, Ruth made him pancakes and kissed him on the forehead and said, "Daddy, go home. Go to Grandpa's house. Go see what's waiting for you down there." Walter went out to the parking lot of her apartment building. His old pickup was loaded already. His father's toolbox was on the passenger seat where his wife used to sit. 3 shirts and 2 pairs of work pants and a duffel bag in the bed. A thermos of black coffee. A paper map of Kentucky he had bought at a gas station because he did not trust his phone to take him into country that small. He climbed into the truck. He started the engine. And Walter Hollis, 67 years old, pointed the nose of his old pickup south toward a farmhouse in Pearson's Hollow he had not seen in 22 years, toward an orchard he expected to find dead, toward a porch he expected to find collapsed, toward a life he could not yet imagine because he had spent 41 years being told that life like that was not for men like him. He did not know yet that the porch had been swept that very morning. He did not know yet that there was a rocking chair waiting on it, oiled and ready. He did not know yet that a woman he had not seen since the summer of 1974 was already standing at the kitchen window of a small farm a mile down the road, watching the county route through her curtains, because Reverend Tobias Pratt had called her the night before and told her, "May, honey, I think Silas's boy is finally coming home." Walter drove south through the foothills. The gray March sky began to break apart somewhere around the Ohio River, and by the time he crossed into Kentucky, the sun was out, and the bluegrass on either side of the highway was the color it only gets in early April. And Walter Hollis put both hands on the steering wheel of his father's truck and felt something he had not felt in 41 years rise up in his chest. It felt almost like hope. The gravel road into Pearson's Hollow had not changed in 22 years. Walter Hollis felt it under the tires of his old pickup before he saw it with his eyes. That soft crunch of Kentucky limestone his grandfather had laid down in 1936. The sound of coming home to a place that had been waiting longer than a man had any right to ask. And before Walter turns that final bend and sees what 22 years of a quiet promise have been keeping alive for him, please tap that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because what is waiting at the end of this gravel road is the kind of ending that only comes once in a lifetime. He turned the bend, and Walter Hollis took his foot off the gas and let the old pickup roll to a stop in the middle of the road, because what he saw did not match anything his heart had prepared for. And the orchard was in bloom, pink and white blossoms, row after row, humming with bees in the late afternoon light. Arkansas black, Grimes golden, Wolf River. The old apple varieties his grandfather had planted in 1934. They were not dead. They were not wild. They were pruned. Someone had walked those rows every February for 22 winters with a sharp pair of shears and a steady hand. Beyond the orchard, the farmhouse stood. New tin on the south side of the roof, silver in the sun. The porch was straight. The steps were swept clean. And on the porch sat his father's black walnut rocking chair, oiled and waiting like a man had only stepped inside for a glass of water. Walter put both hands over his face and wept. He wept the way men of his generation only weep when nobody is watching them, deep and silent and shaking. He wept for 22 springs he had missed. He wept for his father. He wept because the orchard was alive, and he had been told in 1,000 quiet ways for 41 years that nothing of his could stay alive without the woman who had been quietly killing it. He parked under the hickory tree where Silas had always parked. The air smelled of apple blossom and wood smoke. He walked toward the porch the way a man walks toward something he is afraid to wake. The front door opened before he reached the steps. She was standing in the doorway with a key in her hand. Her hair was white now, but her eyes were the same eyes he had known in the summer of 1974, when they had been two kids leaning against the tailgate of his father's truck, and she had told him, "Walter Hollis, you go take that teaching job up north, and I will not be the reason you stay small in this hollow." He had not seen her since. "Walter Hollis," May Ellsworth said, and her voice broke on his name. "Your daddy told me you'd come." Walter could not speak. He climbed the porch steps with one hand on the rail his grandfather had carved, and he opened his arms, and May stepped into them and laid her white head against his shoulder, and the two of them stood on the swept porch and held each other while the bees moved through the apple blossoms below. "Come inside, Walter," she said softly. "There's something on the kitchen table for you. Your daddy left it there in the spring of 2003 and made me promise not to touch it until the day you came home." Walter followed her through the front door of his father's house. The smell hit him first. Old pine boards and beeswax and dried apples. There were fresh wildflowers in a mason jar on the round table, picked that morning. Walter understood without being told that May had walked through this house every month for 22 years, opening the windows and putting fresh flowers on the table, for a man who was not yet ready to come home. She led him into the kitchen. His mother's kettle was still on the wood stove. The window above the sink looked out over the back field. And in the middle of the table, on a folded white dish towel, sat a small wooden box made of black walnut. Walter knew the wood the moment he saw it. He had watched his father plane, enjoying that exact piece in the winter of 1968, when Walter was 10 years old. His father had said then, "Son, this is going to be a box for something important one day." And Walter walked to the table on legs that did not feel like his, and he opened the lid. Inside, on a square of red cloth, lay three things. The first was his grandfather's pocket watch, the one Cordelia had sold to a pawn shop in Akron in 2011. Walter's heart stopped. He lifted it out with trembling fingers. He turned it over and read the engraving his great-grandfather had put there in 1898. To Joseph Hollis, "Time is the only inheritance worth keeping." He looked up at May with a question he could not form. "Your daddy bought it back," May said softly. "He bought all of it back, Walter. Every piece she sold. He had a man in Lexington who watched the pawn shops and the antique dealers from Cincinnati down to Knoxville. Every time something of yours showed up, your daddy bought it back. He used the money from the timber lease on the back 40. He never told you because he did not want you to know what your wife was doing. He said you would figure it out when the time was right. And when you did, he wanted the things to be here waiting for you. The lathe, the hand planes, the walnut chest of drawers. They are all in the barn workshop, Walter. Your daddy spent the last 6 years of his life buying back your inheritance one quiet piece at a time." Walter Hollis sank to his knees on the kitchen floor of his father's house. He pressed the pocket watch against his chest, and he wept the way a son weeps when he finally understands how much his father loved him. The second thing in the box was a letter in his father's careful hand. Walter unfolded it through his tears. "My dear son Walter, if you are reading this, and then you have come home, and I am not surprised. I knew you would. You were always slower than the rest of us to see what was in front of you, but you always saw it eventually. I am sorry I could not say these things to you while I was alive. Your wife was a wall I could not get past, so I did what I could from where I was. I bought back what she sold. I asked May Ellsworth to keep the house for you because she is the only person in this county I trusted to do it without asking questions. The 40 acres of timberland she tried to deed away. I had a lawyer in Beattyville void that signature the week after she filed it. The land has always been yours. Walter, listen to me now. You have spent most of your years being smaller than God made you. That is over. Teach the children of this hollow what I taught you. Build things again. Walk the orchard in the mornings. And Walter, if May Ellsworth is still in this hollow when you get home, you sit on the porch beside her once in a while. She has been carrying a piece of you in her heart since 1974. Come home when you are ready. I have made sure home will be waiting. Your loving father, Silas Hollis." The third thing was a black and white photograph from the summer of 1962. His father in the orchard with a pruning saw. His mother beside him with her hand on his arm. And between them, holding both their hands, a 4-year-old boy in overalls with serious eyes. Walter himself. On the back, in his father's hand, 6 words. This boy is still in there. Walter pressed the photograph to his heart, and May sat down on the kitchen floor beside him and put her arm around his shoulders. And the late afternoon sun came gold through the window, and he let himself be held by a woman who had loved him quietly for 51 years without ever asking him to know it. The summer that followed was the summer Walter Hollis came back to himself. He walked the orchard at dawn every morning with a cup of black coffee. He opened the barn workshop and oiled every tool his father had bought back for him. Reverend Tobias Pratt came by with a casserole. The Beauchamp family brought their grandson, who wanted to learn how to fix a small engine, and Walter said yes. By the end of June, he was teaching a free Saturday morning shop class in his father's barn for any child in Lee County who wanted to learn. The way his father would have done it. His daughter Ruth drove down from Cincinnati every other weekend. She walked the orchard with him and cried in his arms the first time she saw him laughing, the way he had laughed when she was a little girl. In late June, Cordelia came. He saw her car coming up the gravel road and walked down to meet her. He took her to a diner in Beattyville. She told him through her tears that she had been scared and lonely for 40 years and had taken it out on him in 1,000 small ways. She asked him to come home. Walter listened all the way through. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "Cordelia, I forgive you. I forgive you for the lathe and the watch and every quiet thing. But I am not coming back. The man you were married to spent 41 years giving things up so other people would not be uncomfortable. I am not that man anymore." He paid for her coffee. He walked her to her car. He told her to drive safe. He watched her go and felt something old and quiet settle in his chest. Finished. That was the word for it. In August, Nathaniel called. His son had been talking to Ruth. His son had been remembering things differently. He asked if he could come down. Walter said, "Yes, son. You come whenever you are ready." Nathaniel arrived on a Friday in his city clothes and sat down on the porch and said, "Dad, I owe you an apology that is going to take me the rest of my life to make right." Walter put his hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Son, you do not owe me anything. We are just going to start from here." They walked the orchard together until the sun went down, and Nathaniel cried in the rows of Arkansas blacks the way grown men cry when they finally see their fathers clearly. And May Ellsworth came by every few days that summer, bringing him honey from her hives or bread still warm from her oven. They were not courting. They were remembering how to be in the same room. But on a warm evening in late September, after the first apples had come in and the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and clove from the apple butter cooking on the stove, Walter sat down beside May on his father's black walnut rocking chair on the porch, and he reached over without looking at her, and he took her hand. Her hand fit inside his calloused palm the way it had fit in the summer of 1974. May squeezed his fingers once, very softly, and they sat there together and watched the sun go down over the orchard his grandfather had planted in 1934. Walter Hollis was 67 years old. Well, he had spent 41 years inside a marriage built on quiet lies. And then on a gray Tuesday in March, a stranger had spoken his father's name out loud, and a door had opened in a wall Walter had not known was there, and he had walked through it, and on the other side of it had been an orchard in bloom, a black walnut box on a kitchen table, a letter from a father who had loved him more than he had ever known, and a woman who had kept a promise for 22 years without asking for a thing in return. The boy in the photograph was still in there. His father had been right all along. If you have ever felt smaller than God made you, if you have ever wondered whether the people who loved you most were quietly preparing the way home long after you stopped believing home existed, if you have ever needed to be reminded that the truest kind of love is the kind that builds something solid and waits with patience for the right person to find it, then this story belongs to you, the way Silas Hollis's farmhouse belonged to Walter all along. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to come home to themselves. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because every week on this channel we tell the stories of good, quiet people who finally walked through the door their loved ones had been holding open for them all along. Thank you for walking this road with Walter Hollis today. We will see you in the next story. The end.